I met him on a night I didn't think would change anything. It started like any other day, or maybe like the end of one, the kind where you feel like you're just going through the motions, pretending everything is fine when it really isn't. Life had become heavy lately. Not in a dramatic way, not like some movie scene where someone dramatically breaks down and confesses all their pain. No, it was quieter than that. It was exhaustion, the kind that builds up slowly until you don't even notice how tired you are anymore. Work felt pointless. Conversations with people felt shallow. Even the nights didn't bring peace, they were filled with thoughts I couldn't escape. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, I made a decision: I needed to get away. Just for a little while. So I drove. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Didn't check the weather or pack much more than my phone, a hoodie, and whatever music could distract me long enough to make the drive bearable. The highway stretched out in front of me like an escape route, and I followed it without thinking too much about where I was headed. I just wanted silence, space, maybe a little clarity. When I finally pulled off the road, I found myself at a beach, not the crowded kind where tourists take selfies and kids chase seagulls, but a quiet one. One that felt untouched by the rest of the world. The sky was already turning orange as the sun began its slow descent into the ocean. The air smelled like salt and sand and something else I couldn't name, something that felt like possibility. I stepped out of the car and walked barefoot toward the water. The sand was still warm from the sun, but the breeze carried a chill that reminded me summer was slipping away. I didn't mind. There was something peaceful about it. Something honest. I moved past a few scattered groups of people, couples laughing, friends drinking beers, a lone surfer packing up his board, but none of them held my attention. I was looking for a place to be alone. A space where I could sit and breathe without feeling like I had to pretend I was okay. I found a log near the edge of the dunes and settled onto it, letting the weight of the day sink into the wood beneath me. The waves rolled in gently, steady and constant, like they always had been and always would be. I closed my eyes for a moment, just listening. But then, something shifted. A presence. A movement. I opened my eyes again and saw him, sitting not far from me, alone too, staring out at the horizon like he was searching for something. He looked calm, like he belonged there, like he wasn't running from anything the way I was. I almost ignored him, told myself to look away, but something made me pause. Maybe it was the way he sat, relaxed, unbothered, like he wasn't afraid of the silence. Or maybe it was the way the fading light caught his face, making him seem like part of the landscape itself. I watched him for a second longer than I meant to, and then he turned his head slightly. Our eyes met. For a heartbeat, we just looked at each other, no words, no gestures, just recognition. Then he smiled. Not big, not forced. Just enough. That small shift in his expression somehow changed everything. I felt something loosen inside me, like I'd been holding my breath without realizing it. I looked away quickly, pretending I hadn't noticed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. That this night might not be as empty as I thought. The wind picked up a little, blowing strands of hair across my face. I brushed them away and tried to focus back on the sea, but my thoughts kept drifting. What if I said something? What if I just got up and walked away? What if I stayed? And then, before I could decide, he turned toward me. Again, this time, with something more than just a glance. He cleared his throat softly, like he was testing the silence between us. "Nice night," he said. It was simple, casual, but it landed like a question. Like he was asking if I wanted to be alone, or if I was open to something else. I hesitated for only a second before answering. "Yeah," I said quietly. Peaceful. That was how it started. With two strangers on a quiet beach, saying nothing and everything at once. I didn't expect to talk to him. Not really. I came here to be alone, to disappear into the sound of waves and the hush of wind through the dunes. But once he spoke, something shifted, not dramatically, just enough to pull me out of my own head. His voice was calm, deep in a way that made me feel like he'd spoken to me before, even though we were total strangers. He said it again, almost like he was testing if I'd respond, "Nice night." I nodded, then forced myself to say more than just a yes. Maybe it was the setting sun or the quiet around us, but I found myself wanting to answer him properly. "Yeah," I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. "Peaceful." He smiled again, that same soft smile from earlier, and I realized how strange it was that I hadn't noticed his eyes before. They were dark, but there was something gentle in them, something that didn't feel intrusive. He looked at me like he wasn't trying to figure me out, just offering space if I wanted to share something. I wasn't used to that kind of attention, the kind that didn't come with pressure or expectation. "You're here alone?" he asked, still casual, still not pushing. I hesitated for only a second before nodding. Yeah, needed to get away. He didn't ask why right away, and I appreciated that. Instead, he looked back at the sea, watching the waves roll in like they were telling their own story. "Same," he said after a pause. "Sometimes you just need a moment where no one is asking anything of you." I let that sit between us because it felt true. So true that I almost laughed at how much sense it made. We were both here for the same reason, not to escape life entirely, just to take a break from the weight of it. I glanced at him again, this time really looking. He wore a light jacket against the evening chill, sleeves pushed up slightly, revealing faint tattoos on his forearm. Nothing flashy, just lines and shapes that looked like they meant something to him. His hair was short, slightly tousled by the breeze, and there was a small scar near his eyebrow that I couldn't stop noticing once I saw it. I wanted to ask about it, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I found myself speaking without planning what I would say. "I don't usually do this," I admitted, almost surprised by my own words. "Just showing up somewhere random. Talking to someone I don't know." He turned his head toward me again, curious but not pushy. What made tonight different? I thought about that for a second. The truth was, I didn't know exactly. It wasn't like I had a plan when I got in the car. I just knew I couldn't stay where I was. Something inside me needed to move, needed to breathe, needed to feel something real. And now, sitting here beside him, I realized how long it had been since I felt like I belonged in a moment like this. I guess, I started slowly, choosing my words carefully. I guess I just needed to feel like I wasn't completely invisible anymore. He didn't respond right away, but I could tell he heard me. Really heard me. There was no judgment in his expression, no attempt to fill the silence with meaningless chatter. He just sat there, letting my words settle. Then, after a few seconds, he spoke. "I get that," he said softly. "It's easy to feel like you're fading sometimes. Like you're just going through the motions and hoping someone notices." I looked at him then, really met his eyes, and I saw something familiar in them, something I hadn't expected to find in a stranger. He wasn't just saying it to be polite. He meant it. We sat like that for a while, not talking, just listening to the ocean. The sky was darker now, the last traces of orange and pink fading into deep blue. The stars were starting to appear, tiny pinpricks of light scattered across the vastness above us. It was peaceful, but there was something else too, something unspoken building between us. Then, he shifted slightly, turning more toward me. "So," he said, breaking the silence again. "If you're not usually here, what brought you to this beach?" I hesitated again, but this time, it wasn't hesitation born of fear. It was more like deciding how much to give. How much of myself I was willing to hand over in this quiet moment. "I don't know," I said honestly. Maybe I just needed to be somewhere where nobody knew who I was. Where I didn't have to pretend. His expression changed slightly, not in a big way, but enough that I noticed. He seemed to understand. "I think I needed that too," he said quietly. And just like that, the distance between us felt smaller. Not physically, we weren't close, not yet, but emotionally. We were standing at the edge of something, neither of us sure what it was, but both of us willing to step forward. "So I did. I've been carrying a lot lately," I said, surprising myself with how easily the words came. "Things I haven't told anyone. Things I'm not even sure how to explain." He listened, not interrupting, not rushing me. "I don't know if talking about it will fix anything," I continued. "But maybe, just saying it out loud will help me believe it's real." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes that's all we need." I took a breath and looked out at the water again, feeling the weight of everything I hadn't said for so long pressing against my chest. And then, in the quiet of that night, surrounded by sand and stars and the steady rhythm of the sea, I started to speak. I don't remember exactly when we started walking. It felt like the most natural thing in the world, like the night had been leading us there all along. The sky was fully dark now, deep and endless, with stars scattered across it like someone had spilled glitter over a canvas. The moon hung low, casting a soft silver glow on the water, making it shimmer like it was alive. The air had cooled down more, carrying that crisp ocean scent that always makes you feel like you're standing at the edge of something vast and unknowable. We moved slowly, side by side, our footsteps crunching softly against the wet sand near the shoreline. The waves rolled in gently, brushing past our feet before retreating again, leaving behind little trails of foam that glowed faintly under the moonlight. I wasn't sure where we were going, but somehow, it didn't matter. We weren't chasing anything or running from it either. We were just moving together. At some point, he glanced at me and said, "You ever just feel like you're waiting for something? Not knowing what it is, but still waiting." I looked at him, the way his face caught the light from above, the way his voice carried something quiet but real. I thought about how long it had been since I'd allowed myself to hope for something without fear getting in the way. How many nights I had spent lying awake, wondering if I was missing something, not necessarily a person, but a moment. A connection. A shift. "Yeah," I said finally. "I think I've been waiting for a long time." He nodded like he understood, like he had been waiting too. We kept walking, letting silence stretch between us, not uncomfortable, just present. Every so often, we would glance at each other, exchanging small smiles like secret acknowledgments of something neither of us could quite name yet. Then he stopped suddenly, turning toward me. His eyes searched mine for a second before he spoke. "You ever done this before?" he asked, not accusing, just curious. I shook my head. "No. I mean, not really. Not like this." He smiled slightly, like he found that endearing. "Me neither." It was strange hearing him say that. He seemed so sure of himself, so grounded, like he knew exactly who he was. But maybe that was part of it. Maybe being sure of yourself meant being honest about the things you didn't know, the moments you couldn't predict. We kept walking, slower now, as if the weight of everything we hadn't said yet was pressing down on us. The beach stretched out endlessly ahead, untouched by footprints except for ours. The only sounds were the waves, the wind, and the occasional cry of a distant seagull. "I used to come here a lot when I was younger," he said after a while. "Back when I needed somewhere to disappear." I looked at him, surprised. "What changed?" He shrugged. "I guess I stopped needing to hide as much." That hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to press for more, but I held back. Some things needed to be earned, not forced. Instead, I asked, "Why tonight? Why come back now?" He was quiet for a few steps before answering. "Maybe because I needed to remember who I was before everything else got complicated." I didn't respond right away. I just let his words settle inside me, wrapping around something I hadn't realized I was missing. There was something incredibly powerful about being seen, not just physically, but emotionally. And in that moment, even though we were still mostly strangers, I felt like he saw me. Not the version of me I showed the world, but the one I kept locked away, the one I barely acknowledged existed. We walked until the sand gave way to rocky patches, until the dunes behind us faded into darkness. At some point, we sat down, not because we were tired, but because it just felt right. The ocean stretched out in front of us, endless and calm, like it had been watching us the whole time. He reached down and picked up a piece of driftwood, turning it over in his hands like it might tell him something important. Then, without saying anything, he drew a line in the sand between us, straight, deliberate. "This is where we decide," he said quietly. I looked at the line, then at him. My heart was beating faster than I expected. "We can go back," he continued. "Go our separate ways, pretend this night was just another random thing that happened and forget about it." He paused, meeting my eyes. "Or," he added, softer now, "we can keep walking. See where this goes." The wind blew through my hair, carrying the scent of salt and possibility. I stared at the line in the sand, feeling like it wasn't just separating us, it was separating who I had been from who I could become. And then, without thinking, I stepped over it. He watched me do it, then smiled, slow, genuine, full of something I couldn't quite put into words. Without speaking, he stood up and extended his hand to me. I took it. And together, we kept walking. We ended up at a hidden spot behind the dunes, where the wind was quieter and the world felt smaller. Someone had built a fire earlier, maybe hours ago, maybe just before we arrived, but only embers remained, glowing faintly in the pit they'd dug into the sand. He found more driftwood nearby, pieces that had been smoothed by the tide and dried by the sun, and started feeding them into the coals. The flames flickered to life slowly, hesitant at first, then stronger, casting long shadows across the sand. I sat close enough that I could feel the warmth against my skin, but not so close that it felt forced. There was something intimate about this moment, not in a physical way, but in the way silence can stretch between two people and still feel full. We didn't speak for a while. Just watched the fire grow, listened to the waves crash softly in the distance, let the night settle around us like a blanket we both needed. He leaned back on his elbows, staring up at the sky. "You ever feel like you carry things for too long?" he asked suddenly, voice low, almost like he wasn't sure if he wanted an answer or just wanted the question to hang in the air. I looked at him, the firelight catching the edges of his face, making him look older, wiser somehow. "All the time," I admitted. He nodded, like he expected that. Then, after a pause, he said, "I've been carrying something for most of my life." I waited. Not because I wanted to push, but because I knew some truths take time to come out. He exhaled slowly, turning his head toward me. "I'm gay," he said simply. It wasn't dramatic. No pause for effect, no hesitation in his voice. Just a statement, like telling me his name or where he grew up. But it landed differently. It landed like weight being set down after years of holding it alone. I didn't respond right away. My throat tightened without warning, and I swallowed hard, trying to keep my expression neutral even though something inside me shifted. He noticed. Of course he did. "You okay?" he asked gently. I nodded, but it was automatic. The real answer was more complicated. Because hearing him say it so easily, so casually, made me realize how much I had never said it out loud. Not to anyone. Not even to myself, not really. I started, then stopped. My voice cracked slightly, and I hated that. Hated how weak it made me feel, how much it reminded me of every time I tried to pretend I didn't care, when I actually cared too much. He didn't push. He just waited, watching me with that same quiet understanding from earlier. Finally, I whispered, "So am I." The words came out barely above a breath, but they were louder than anything I had ever said. They echoed in my chest, bouncing off walls I hadn't realized were still standing. He smiled. Not big, not flashy, just soft. Like he already knew. Or maybe like he was proud of me for saying it. "Why's it feel like such a secret?" I asked, not really expecting an answer. Like, why does it feel like something you have to hide? He thought about that for a second before answering. Maybe because we're taught to be afraid of it. Or maybe because we're afraid of what people will think if they know who we really are. I stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. Sometimes I wonder if I would have turned out different if I hadn't spent so long pretending. He shook his head. "You wouldn't be you if you hadn't gone through all that. Maybe it took longer to get here, but you're here now." I looked at him again, really looked at him, and saw something familiar in his eyes. Not because I knew him, but because I recognized parts of myself in him. The way he carried his truth, the way he seemed to understand without needing explanations. We sat in silence for a while after that, letting the weight of our words settle. The fire crackled between us, sending sparks floating into the night sky like tiny stars trying to escape gravity. Then he spoke again, quieter this time. "I used to think there was something wrong with me. That if I just tried harder, I'd feel different. Be different." I nodded. "Same. I told myself I was just confused. That it would pass. That maybe I was broken." His jaw tightened slightly, like he hated hearing that. "You're not broken," he said firmly. "You're just human." I let that sink in. Let it sit beside all the other things I had told myself over the years, the lies, the doubts, the fear. And for the first time, I believed someone else's truth more than my own. "I don't even know your name," I said suddenly, realizing it for the first time. He chuckled. "Does it matter?" I shrugged. "Maybe not tonight. But someday." He nodded. "Someday." And just like that, the night felt different. Not because we had said those words, but because we had allowed each other to hear them. To hold them. To carry them together. The fire burned lower as the night deepened, but neither of us moved to leave. Instead, we pulled our jackets tighter against the chill and kept talking, about everything and nothing. About people we had loved and lost, about dreams we weren't sure we were allowed to chase, about the way the world sometimes made us feel like we had to choose between being ourselves and being accepted. And in that space, surrounded by darkness and firelight and honesty, I realized something: I wasn't alone anymore. Not completely. Not tonight. I don't know exactly when the distance between us closed. It didn't happen all at once, not like in movies where two people suddenly lean into each other with perfect timing and soft music swelling in the background. No, it was slower than that. Subtler. A shift in the air, a glance held a second too long, a quiet laugh that lingered just enough to feel different. We had been talking for hours, about everything and nothing, about things we hadn't told anyone else, about dreams we weren't sure we were allowed to have. The fire had burned low, reduced to glowing embers that flickered faintly against the dark sand. The night had deepened around us, thick and still, broken only by the distant rhythm of waves rolling onto shore. The wind had died down, leaving behind a hush that felt almost sacred. He shifted slightly, turning more toward me, his knees drawn up as he rested his arms on them. His eyes caught the last bits of firelight, making them look darker than they were, like pools of something I wasn't ready to name yet. "You ever been in love?" he asked, voice low, almost hesitant. I blinked, surprised by the question. Not because it was personal, we had already shared so much, but because it felt like a door opening, like we were stepping closer to something neither of us had said out loud yet. "I don't think so," I admitted after a pause. "Not really. Maybe infatuation. Or what I thought was love." I looked at him then, trying to read his expression. "You." He smiled, but there was something bittersweet in it. "Once," he said simply. "A long time ago." I waited, sensing there was more, but not pushing. He exhaled slowly, staring at the dying fire. "His name was Daniel. We met in college. He was everything I thought I needed back then: confident, funny, fearless. I used to watch him from across the room, wondering if he'd ever notice me." His voice carried a kind of ache that made my chest tighten. "What happened?" I asked quietly. He shrugged. "We happened. For a while. Then we didn't." He paused, then added, "He wasn't ready. Or maybe I wasn't. Either way, it ended before it could really begin." I swallowed hard, feeling something familiar in his words. I had lived that story too, not the same details, but the same shape. The slow build of hope, the quiet collapse of it. "I think I've done that too," I said softly. "Fallen for someone who couldn't stay." He looked at me then, really looked, like he saw something in me that matched what he had lost. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "No," I said honestly. "Even if it didn't last, it mattered. It changed me." He nodded like he understood, like he had already known what I would say. And then, without warning, he reached out and touched my hand. It was light, just the brush of his fingers against mine, but it sent a jolt through me, like static crackling along my skin. I didn't pull away. I didn't even breathe right. His touch lingered, warm despite the cool night air. And then, slowly, his fingers curled around mine, not tight, just enough to hold. I looked at our hands, connected in the dim glow of the fire, and felt something inside me shift. Something I had buried for so long that I had convinced myself it didn't exist anymore. He must have felt it too, because he turned his head toward me again, studying my face like he was searching for permission. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Instead, I moved closer. Just a little. Just enough. And then he leaned in. It wasn't rushed. There was no urgency, no desperate grab or clumsy movement. It was slow, deliberate, like we both knew this moment had been building since the first time we looked at each other on the beach. Our lips met gently, barely touching at first, like testing the temperature of water before stepping in. But then, without either of us saying anything, it deepened. His mouth moved against mine, careful but certain, like he had been waiting for this just as long as I had. My heart pounded in my chest, faster and louder than I expected, like it was trying to remind me how long it had been since I had let myself feel something real. I pressed into the kiss, letting my hands slide into his hair, feeling the soft strands between my fingers. He responded instantly, shifting closer, one of his hands resting on my back, holding me in place like he was afraid I might disappear. The world around us blurred, the fire, the ocean, the stars above us. All of it faded into the background, leaving only this, the warmth of his body beside mine, the taste of salt and something sweet on his lips, the sound of our breathing sinking together. When we finally pulled apart, it was only far enough to catch our breath. Our foreheads touched, our noses brushing lightly, and I opened my eyes to find him looking at me like I had just shown him something he never thought he'd see. Neither of us spoke. Words didn't seem necessary anymore. Instead, he kissed me again. This time, it was deeper. More certain. Like we had both decided, without needing to say it, that we weren't going to hold back. I wrapped my arms around him, pulling him close, feeling the steady beat of his heart against my chest. He responded by tightening his grip, holding me like he was afraid this moment might slip away if he let go. We kissed like we had been waiting for this our whole lives, like we had spent years carrying pieces of ourselves alone, only to finally find someone who wanted to carry them with us. The fire behind us burned lower, fading into the darkness, but we didn't move. We stayed tangled in each other, wrapped in blankets we had brought earlier, letting the night stretch around us like it belonged to us. Somewhere beyond the dunes, the tide rolled in, whispering secrets only the sea knows. But none of it mattered now. All that mattered was this. Him, me, us, and the truth we had finally stopped hiding from. I woke up slowly, like surfacing from deep water, the weight of sleep still clinging to me. The first thing I felt was warmth, not just from the fading embers of the fire behind us, but from him. His arm was draped loosely around my waist, his breath steady against my neck, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that somehow matched mine. We were tangled together beneath the blanket we had wrapped ourselves in hours ago, our bodies pressed close, not out of necessity anymore, but out of something deeper. The sky above us was beginning to change, not fully light yet, but no longer dark. It was that quiet, in-between moment where the world seemed to hold its breath, caught between night and day. A soft pink glow stretched across the horizon, touching the ocean with gold, making it look like it was breathing with the morning. The waves rolled in gently, whispering against the shore like they had been watching us all night, keeping our secrets. I didn't move right away. I just lay there, letting the reality of everything settle over me. Last night hadn't been a dream. It had happened. All of it, the words we shared, the truths we whispered into the firelight, the way our hands found each other without hesitation, the way we kissed like we had been waiting for this moment our whole lives. And now here we were. Still together. Still real. A part of me expected panic to set in, the kind that comes after doing something you weren't sure you were ready for. But instead, there was only peace. A strange, unexpected calm that settled deep in my chest, like I had finally exhaled after holding my breath for too long. He stirred beside me, shifting slightly before tightening his grip around my waist. He didn't open his eyes, just hummed softly, almost like he knew I was awake and wanted to keep me close. I smiled without meaning to, feeling something unfamiliar bloom inside me, not fear, not regret, not even uncertainty. Just contentment. I tilted my head to look at him, watching the way the early light caught his face, softening the sharp lines of his jaw, highlighting the faint stubble along his cheek. There was something so incredibly intimate about seeing someone like this, not guarded, not performing, just existing in the quiet space between sleep and wakefulness. His eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. He blinked once, twice, then focused on me, a slow smile spreading across his lips. "Morning," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. I swallowed, my own throat dry from the night air. "Hey." He didn't let go of me. If anything, he pulled me closer, pressing a kiss to my forehead before resting his chin on top of my head. We lay like that for a while, neither of us speaking, just listening to the world waking up around us. The beach wasn't empty anymore. In the distance, I could see joggers moving along the shoreline, a couple walking their dog, someone setting up a chair near the water's edge. Life was continuing as if nothing extraordinary had happened last night. But something had happened. Something that changed me. I turned my head slightly, resting my cheek against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It was grounding. Real. Then, quietly, he asked, "Do you regret it?" I stiffened slightly, surprised by the question. Not because I hadn't thought about it, but because I hadn't expected to feel the need to explain myself. I lifted my head to meet his gaze, searching his eyes for what he really meant. "No," I said honestly. "I don't." He studied me for a second, like he was trying to decide if I meant it. Then, slowly, he exhaled, like he had been holding onto something. Good, he said simply. I smiled again, a little wider this time. You. He shook his head. Not even a little. There was a pause, filled only by the sound of the wind brushing through the dunes behind us. I've never done this before, I admitted, looking away briefly. Woken up next to someone like this. He didn't say anything for a moment, just watched me. What do you mean? He asked gently. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I mean, I've never let myself be this honest. With anyone. His expression softened. That's a big deal. I nodded. Yeah, it is. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from my face, his fingers lingering against my skin. Longer than necessary. I'm glad you did, he said. I looked at him again, really looked, and saw something in his eyes that made my chest tighten. Not sadness, not longing, but something quieter. Something like gratitude. We stayed like that for a little while longer, wrapped in silence in the hush of the morning. Eventually, though, the world outside of this moment started creeping back in. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows across the sand. The tide had shifted, pulling away from where we lay, leaving behind wet footprints that would soon disappear. It was time to move. Reluctantly, I sat up, stretching my arms above my head as the cool morning air hit my bare skin. He followed suit, running a hand through his already messy hair, yawning before standing. We should probably get going, he said, glancing toward the parking lot in the distance. I nodded, though I didn't want the night to end. I didn't want to leave this place, this moment, this version of myself that felt lighter than I had in years. As we gathered our things, folding the blankets and shaking off the sand, I realized something. I wasn't afraid of what came next. Not because I knew what it was, but because for once, I wasn't hiding from it. He noticed me watching him as he packed up, and he smirked. What? He asked. I shook my head. Nothing. Just, thank you. He raised an eyebrow. For what? For being real, I said simply. He studied me for a second, then stepped forward, closing the distance between us. He placed a hand on my cheek, his thumb brushing lightly over my skin. You don't have to thank me for that, he said. I was just being me. I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes briefly before opening them again. That's exactly why I'm thanking you, I said. He smiled, then dropped his hand and took a step back. Come on, he said, gesturing toward the path leading back to the parking lot. Let's walk you to your car. I followed him without hesitation, stepping into the morning with him beside me, knowing that even though the night was over, something else had just begun. We walked slowly, not because we had to, but because neither of us wanted to rush. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of salt and damp sand, the kind that lingers after a night by the ocean. The sky was fully awake now, pale blue with streaks of white clouds drifting lazily overhead. The sun sat higher on the horizon, casting long shadows behind us as we moved along the edge of the dunes. The beach was waking up too. People jogging, kids chasing seagulls, couples setting up chairs near the water's edge. Life was continuing like it always did, like nothing extraordinary had happened last night. But for me, everything felt different. I glanced at him beside me, his hands in his pockets, his steps measured. He looked peaceful, like he wasn't afraid of what came next either. I envied that about him, how easily he seemed to carry himself through life, how unbothered he looked even when things were uncertain. I wondered if he felt it too, that strange mix of sadness and gratitude that comes when you know something beautiful is ending, but you don't want to pretend it didn't matter just because it couldn't last forever. You really only here for the weekend? I asked, breaking the silence between us. He nodded. Yeah, got a train back tomorrow afternoon. I swallowed, trying to keep my expression neutral. I had known this from the start. Had known that this night wasn't meant to be anything more than what it was. A moment, a pause, a breath held in the chaos of real life. And yet, hearing it said out loud made it feel heavier. Do you come here often? I asked, almost hoping he'd say yes. That maybe this place meant something to him, that maybe he'd return someday. He shook his head. Not really. Not since, well, not in years. He glanced at me then, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. Guess I needed to remember why I used to. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I focused on the sound of our footsteps against the packed sand, the way the waves rolled in gently behind us, like they were watching us leave. What happens now? I asked finally, voice quieter than I intended. He slowed his pace slightly, turning his head toward me. You mean with us? I nodded, still looking ahead. There was a pause before he answered, like he was choosing his words carefully. I think, he said slowly, that depends on what you want it to be. I let that settle inside me, feeling the weight of it. Because that was the thing about moments like this, they gave you choices. They gave you space to decide whether to hold on or let go. And honestly, I wasn't sure which one I wanted. I took a deep breath, letting the salty air fill my lungs. I don't know, I admitted. I've never done this before. I don't know how to walk away from something that meant this much. He stopped walking then, turning to face me fully. His eyes searched mine, not with pressure, but with understanding. You don't have to walk away, he said softly. Not completely. I frowned slightly, confused. He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the tiny flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Just because we're not going to see each other every day doesn't mean this was just a one-night thing. It doesn't have to be. I stared at him, heart pounding in my chest. What are you saying? He smiled, slow and genuine. I'm saying that if you want to talk again, if you want to meet up sometime, there's no reason we can't. I felt something shift inside me, not relief exactly, but something close to it. A quiet hope, flickering like the last embers of the fire we had left behind. I looked down at my feet for a second, then back up at him. What if I chicken out? I asked, half joking but also completely serious. He chuckled. Then I'll remind you that you didn't last night. I let out a breath, shaking my head slightly. That was different. How? He asked. Because last night, I didn't have time to overthink it. I just went with it. He tilted his head slightly. Maybe that's the point. I studied him for a moment, realizing how easy it was to fall into his rhythm, how effortlessly he made me feel like I didn't need to overcomplicate things. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the pen I had used earlier to write my number on a napkin. Without thinking, I grabbed his hand and started writing. He watched me, silent, letting me do it without interrupting. When I finished, I stepped back and looked at him. There, I said. Now you don't have an excuse. He looked down at his hand, reading the numbers scrawled across his skin, then looked back up at me with a grin. I guess I don't, he agreed. For a moment, we just stood there, facing each other, the space between us charged with something unspoken but deeply felt. Then, quietly, he asked, "Are you okay?" I blinked, surprised by the question. "Yeah," I said honestly. "Why?" He shrugged slightly. "Just making sure. Sometimes these kinds of nights hit differently once the sun comes up." I thought about that. About how sometimes, the light makes you doubt the magic of the dark. But not today. No, I said firmly. I'm not okay. I'm better than okay. He smiled again, brighter this time. Good. I looked past him toward the parking lot, where my car sat waiting. Where reality waited. And suddenly, the idea of leaving him felt heavier than I expected. I hesitated, then asked, "Will I see you again?" He didn't answer right away. Just looked at me, like he was memorizing this version of me, the one who had let go of fear, who had kissed him under the stars, who had whispered truths into the firelight. Then he said, "If you want to, yeah." I nodded slowly, letting his words sink in. Letting myself believe them. Then, before I could stop myself, I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around him. He responded instantly, pulling me close, holding me like he didn't want this to end either. We stayed like that for a long moment, the world around us moving while we stood still. When I finally pulled back, my throat felt tight. I cleared it, trying to shake the emotion that had settled there. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For everything." His fingers brushed lightly against my cheek before he let his hand drop. "No," he said gently. "Thank you asterisk." And with that, we turned. Walking side by side until the path split, one leading to my car, the other to wherever he was staying. I paused at the edge of the pavement, glancing back one last time. He was already walking away, hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed. Like he knew I was watching. Like he wasn't worried about being forgotten. I stood there for a few seconds longer, letting the weight of the night settle into my bones. Then I turned and walked toward my car, knowing that even though we were parting ways, something had changed. Something real. Something lasting. And even if we never saw each other again, I would carry this night with me. Forever. I drove home with the windows down, letting the wind rush past me like it could carry away everything I had been holding onto for too long. The sky was clear now, stretched wide and endless above me, painted in soft blues and wisps of clouds that drifted lazily across the horizon. The ocean was behind me, fading into memory, but its presence still lingered in my chest, deep, steady, grounding. The road blurred beneath my tires, and I found myself replaying every moment of the night like a movie I didn't want to end. His voice, the way he looked at me, the firelight dancing in his eyes, the quiet honesty we shared, wrapped in blankets and silence, the way he kissed me like he had been waiting his whole life just to find someone who understood what it meant to be seen. And then there was the morning, the slow waking, the warmth of his body beside mine, the way he held me like he didn't want to let go either. The way he smiled when I said I didn't regret any of it. The way he wrote his number on my hand without hesitation, like he already knew I would want to hear from him again. Even now, hours later, I could still feel the imprint of his touch on my skin. I hadn't expected this. Not really. I came to the beach looking for escape, for space, for silence. But what I found was something entirely different. Something real. Something I had spent so long pretending I didn't need. I pulled into my driveway and sat there for a moment, engine idling, hands gripping the steering wheel as if I needed something solid to remind me that I was back in the real world. That this wasn't just another dream I would forget by noon. But I wouldn't forget. Not tonight. Not him. Not what happened between us. I turned off the car and stepped out, the sun warm against my face, the breeze carrying the last traces of salt and sand from my clothes. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, fingers hovering over the screen before unlocking it. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had something to say. So I opened my social media app, tapped the camera icon, and stared at the blank text box like it held all the words I had never known how to use before. Then I started typing. Last night changed me. Asterisk. That was all. Just 3 simple words. No explanation, no pictures, no proof. Just a statement, raw and unfiltered. And yet, as soon as I hit post, something inside me shifted. It was like I had finally given myself permission to exist, not just in secret, not just in shadows, but fully, honestly, without apology. I waited, watching as notifications started to roll in. Some from strangers, some from people I hadn't spoken to in years, some from people I had never met, leaving messages like, "Me too, asterisk, thank you for saying that, asterisk, you're not alone." Asterisk. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about him. It wasn't even just about the night we shared. It was about everything that led up to it. The years of silence, the fear of being seen, the weight of pretending to be someone I wasn't just to make others comfortable. That night didn't change who I was. It reminded me of who I had always been. And maybe, just maybe, it reminded someone else too. I scrolled through the comments, reading each one carefully, feeling the connection stretch beyond the screen, beyond my little apartment, beyond the walls I had built around myself for so long. Someone asked if I wanted to talk more about it. Another person shared their own story, a story not unlike mine. Someone else simply wrote, "This matters." Asterisk. And they were right. Because sometimes, all it takes is one honest moment to remind people that they're not the only ones who have ever felt afraid. That they're not broken for wanting to be loved exactly as they are. That they don't have to hide forever. Sometimes, all it takes is one night, one stranger, one kiss under the stars, to remind you that you deserve to be seen. I closed the app and took a deep breath, letting the weight of everything settle inside me. I didn't know if I would see him again. I didn't know if our paths would cross once more, if we would sit by another fire, if we would laugh the way we did, if we would kiss again like the world was ending and beginning all at once. Maybe we would. Maybe we wouldn't. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that I had allowed myself to feel. To be honest. To be free. And that was enough. If you've ever felt afraid to be who you truly are. If you've ever wondered if you're the only one who feels like this. If you've ever wished someone would just see you. Know this. You're not alone. There's someone out there who will listen. Who will understand. Who will make you feel like you belong. And if this story touched you. If it reminded you of something you had forgotten. Or gave you hope for something you've been scared to chase. Please do me a favor. Like this video, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Tell me your story. Or just say, thank you. Because sometimes, that's all it takes, to remind someone they're not alone.